speaking of which, let's turn our attention towards the 2018 signature. As I said, I had actually forgotten what a complete and seamless wine it was. And, I had a little taste last night and then I had a little taste today. And just that difference overnight was quite something as well. With it being 2018, there is already some evolution here, but it's still got quite a long way to go. It's drinking wonderfully right now. And then just the concentration of fruit and that integration of the Cabernet and the Shiraz and the very particular cooperage that you use for this. I found it was just an absolutely wonderful translation of the soil of the Barossa and those two signature grapes for the Barossa. But I'd like your take on this wine because I think it's very special.
Well, I think you've just given a beautiful sum up of that wine. So I think there's two things about the signature which are really important. One is the wine itself, which is that blend of Cabernet Sauvignon and Shiraz, as you've mentioned, which we think of as quite an Australian blend.
Yeah.
It's been used as a blend in Australia for decades and decades. Here at Yalumba, we know we've been blending those two varieties together since at least the early 1890s, and probably earlier than that, because we certainly had Cabernet here earlier than that, as well as Shiraz. But that's the records that we can find back in the 1890s. A wine that we referred to, as we did for full-bodied wines, for many decades as a claret, and of course, not anymore. We appreciate that claret has its own home in the world in France, and it's not here, but that's that style of wine. And I always think about Cabernet and Shiraz, so beautifully going together because they're, Cabernet's got the seriousness and the structure and that amazing, beautiful sort of length of tannin, and then you've got the Shiraz, which has got a little bit more warmth and a little bit more spice, and it sort of comes and sort of wraps itself around and intertwines itself with the Cabernet and gives it a big hug in if you want to think about it in that sort of way. But together, the wines have then that beautiful sort of drinkability, but also the structure to be able to age for a very, very long time. And they do. And I thank you for saying how beautifully it's looking now, because I think one of the important things about wine, and any wine, it doesn't matter how impressive it is, how expensive it is, and how well you think it's going to age. When we release wines, they must be drinkable. People, whether it is the restaurants with the white tablecloths or whether it's consumers going to a shop and taking something home, in most cases, people expect a wine to be, for us to sell them a wine that they can drink straight away. I mean, you can't tell people you have to put this wine away. You can't. So for us, it's about when we're not releasing these wines until we know that they're absolutely spot on and beautiful drinking. But what we will tell to people is that the signature, and many of our other wines, but the signature in particular, is a wine that you can pop in your cellar and you can age that wine. And depending on how much of that evolution you like in a wine, this wine will never disappoint you. They age very slowly. I mean, we have had a little bit of a release this year of a little bit of a museum, holdback of museum collection. We've released some wines with 10 and 15 years of wine on their age on them. Sorry, and they're people. Almost always the comment is, "Wow, these wines still look so youthful," and I would hope so, because 10 and 15 years is not old in a great wine's life, but you can see how those wines are starting to evolve. During the celebrations this year, we've had a couple of really special tastings, and we've opened signatures at 20 years from 2004. We've also opened the 50-year signature from 1974. And both wines, again, people going, wow, they can't believe how, they can't believe they're as old as the label would say.
A lot of people who are perhaps a little more uninformed imagine that there's no vintage variation from various regions in Australia, but there certainly is. Let's talk about the 2018 and what that meant to you as a vintage.
Yeah, so the 2018 vintage was one of those really beautiful, vintages, and we are very lucky here. I mean, yes, absolutely, we have vintage variation, but and there are a few vintages. For example, we didn't release a 2017 signature because even though we made those components that we thought would go into the wine, we realised as they were aging that they weren't weren't of that very high quality that we, that benchmark that we have to achieve. And of course, after we've achieved that benchmark of quality, then we do see some vintage variation. But 18 is very beautifully structured wine. It was a dry winter, spring, drier than average. Coming into a warm but beautiful, even ripening period. Not a lot of sort of heat spikes and things. And the wines they are just classically beautiful structured wines with lovely sort of fragrance and perfume. The wine comes from both the Eden Valley and the Barossa Valley parts of the Barossa. So most people might not realise, but Barossa has a lower part of it, which is where most of the grapes are grown. But it's warmer, the soils are more fertile, the grapes ripen a little bit earlier. And then there's also the higher altitude Eden Valley, and by higher altitude, the nighttime particularly become cooler, and the vines rest more. They keep more of their aromatic, perfumes. In the case of red Shiraz and Cabernet, more of the rose petals and blueberries and sage sort of characters. And then we blend those together. And in 2018, Eden Valley played a significant role in this wine, and it just overlays the Barossa Valley, texture and warmth on the palate with that beautiful aromatics. And I think it's I don't think you can get much more of a perfect wine really and balance than we could have in 2018. I think it's a stunning wine.
May I ask you to speak to the percentages of Cabernet and Shiraz in there, and also the very particular cooperage that you use to age this wine?
Yeah, I can, absolutely. So the wine is 54% Cabernet and 46% Shiraz, and that is a fairly typical blend for Signature over the years. It varies slightly from year to year, but not much. Always just a little bit Cabernet dominant. And the cooperage is quite special because it's our own cooperage. And so we have on-site our cooperage that makes a significant number of the barrels that we use for our whole business. But in the case of the Signature and Yalumba's other rare and fine, our premium wines, we use that exclusively. There's no oak grown in Australia for making barrels, so we do import the wood. And in the case of the 18, we've got French oak, Hungarian oak, and also some American oak. But what having your own cooperage does is it allows you to choose all the variables that come in barrels when you're making barrels, and fine tune it specifically for a wine, for a vintage, and the vineyards around it. And for a winemaker to have that opportunity, it's amazing. As far as we know, we're the only winery that do that in the Southern Hemisphere, and we know we're only one of a handful around the world. So it is an amazing thing to have for a winemaker to be able to go down and literally say, toast that for a little bit longer, or actually I want more French oak barrels than American this year, and I want 225 litre barrels, not 300 litre barrels, or they're the sort of the variables that we can have and fine tune it. And again, over years and years and years of understanding, how wines are impacted by our own coopered barrels, we fine tune that in a beautiful way. I hope the first thing people taste when they taste this wine is not oak, because it's not meant to be all about the cooperage. But this wine spent 21 months in barrels. It's a really important part of its life, and for that, you need to make sure that your barrels are absolutely perfect. Super. So about a third of the barrels that we used for this wine were new oak, which means they're first time used, and then the other 2/3 were older barrels that didn't have as much of that new oak flavour, but still a really, really important part of the wine.
Excellent, excellent. So I have a question for both of you here. You both work with this wine in your ambassadorial roles around the world and in Ontario. I'd be curious as to where you think this wine sits at the dinner table. What would the perfect pairings be with this wine for you, both personally?
Liz, you go first.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I was about to try and make you go first. For me, it is obviously special occasions, and around my place, that would mean something roasted.
Yeah.
Ideally red meat. I always do kind of lean towards lamb when I'm talking about both Cab and Shiraz, frankly. And not that I have a fireplace, but a little bit of fireplace contemplation would be the perfect way of rounding it out.
Yeah, I hear you on that one. And you, over to our winemaker. Where do you feel this sits perfectly at the dinner table?
Well, we would usually have it, with red meat, but and I think Liz has summed it up perfectly. If you've got fire and a bit of charcoal, and whether it be lamb or beef, or it goes quite nicely with some nice lean kangaroo meat as well, which you might have more trouble finding in Ontario, perhaps, than no, I'm just going to say, but it also, it is a really beautiful sort of, wine, and I think it's the sort of the roundness of this wine also goes really quite beautifully with quite spicy foods as well.
Yeah.
So if you were looking at, even some sort of, some curries and, foods like that, I think, and that way you can, getting into a lot of the sort of the vegetarian sort of, areas as well with pulses and things like that. Texturally, these wines work beautifully alongside those as well. So I think while, you might sit down and dream up your perfect sort of, this goes with a fire roasted, leg of lamb, which is probably true. One of the things that we do a lot of here is we experimenting with our wines and our foods literally in the kitchen, cooking with spices and cooking with other things. And, understanding that the world has very diverse foods, and how do we fit in with that? And I think, we're really confident with the wines that we make that full-bodied red wine that it may be, it's going to go across a really, beautiful sort of spectrum of food. And I tell you what, if I had that charcoal burner going and I had some chickens to put on it, I'd be really happy, blending blending the wine and food combination with that as well. And to me, it's that broadening and that experimenting and that having fun. And if you go back to the white tablecloth sort of, scenario again, you're not going to have the same people sitting around. Well, sorry, you're probably not going to have everybody around that table eating the same food.
Right.
And we know that, and that's why these wines need to be more than just, one trick pony wines.
Well, I'm going to do a bit of an experiment. It's hunting season here right now in Canada, and I have a lot of friends who hunt. And they owed me a few favors. So I've been given moose steaks and a massive moose roast. So I'm going to cook that this evening for tomorrow and have the rest of this bottle with that. I'll let you know how it goes.
Well, please do. I'm pretty confident it's going to be an amazing match, but I would love to be able to put that into my repertoire of going, and it goes beautifully with moose.
I'll pop you an email and let you know how it goes. Thank you very much, both of you, Elisabeth and Louisa, for joining us at Good Food Revolution today. Really appreciate your time. And Louisa, I really appreciate your wine. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jamie.
Take care. Bye for now.
Thanks, Jamie. Bye-bye.